The dark clouds had spread across the western horizon by the time the yellow school bus had made its way down the winding hill to the intersection of Texas 29 and US 281, which marked the halfway point of their trip. 36 basketball players, 3 coaches, and 3 student trainers and statisticians were traveling northwest on a 3-hour journey on winding roads through the hill country to play their final district game, with the outside possibility of the district championship on the line. The Mustangs were in first place in a tough district with 1 loss, and Coach Tim Kelly's Cougars and the Bulldogs were tied for second place with 2 losses each. If the Mustangs won their game tonight, the outcome of the Cougars' Yellow Jackets game would not factor into deciding the playoff team from the district. However, if the Mustangs lost and the Cougars won, the Cougars and Mustangs would have a playoff game to decide the district winner. If the Yellow Jackets won and the Mustangs lost, there would be a 3-way tie and a coin flip to determine the district rep. Both teams knew their odds of the Mustangs losing to the team in 6th place were slim, but they were determined to play the game, if possible. The "if possible" disclaimer was because the Austin TV weathermen had spent the whole week forecasting that rarest of Central Texas weather events, the chance of frozen precipitation. In fact, they said it was possible blizzard-like conditions could develop, but everyone scoffed. That never happened. The morning forecast said the frozen stuff would not begin in the western hill country, where they were headed, until after midnight. So they were hurrying northwest to get the game in before it started. If the bad weather arrived per the prediction, it would follow them home without causing icing problems for the bus. Still, weather forecasts involving a powerful Arctic blast meeting warmer, moist Texas air over the Balcones uplift were tricky, and it had been nearly 8 hours since Coach Kelly last heard a weather forecast. When he called at noon, the Bulldogs coach had informed him that there had been no change in the forecast, so the games were still on. So, here they were, driving toward a winter storm in a 10-year-old school bus with a bad heater, trusting that the weather would hold until they got the games played and got home safely home, probably well after midnight. Coach Kelly parked the long bus beside a large convenience store, stood to face the kids, and gave them a cursory reminder about representing their school and families appropriately when in stores. He then told them that the impending bad weather would mean they would not have a chance to eat after the game. So grab some snacks now to tide them over, and eat a burger or something more substantial at the concession stand. After their team played, the 2 assistant coaches went inside with the players to ensure proper conduct inside the store. Or, actually, to assuage the fears of store personnel that they would be unruly shoplifters. Their well-raised country kids weren't going to do something like that, but it was good practice to keep the store owners and operators happy, so they just stood guard by the doors until all the kids were back on the bus. Coach Kelly stood up, stretched, and walked around to get his circulation going before he drove the remaining 90 minutes to their destination. As he walked around the bus, he visually inspected the tires and looked for dripping fluids. It would not do to have a flat or a mechanical breakdown on this trip, which featured winding roads, steep grades, and narrow lanes with no shoulders to pull off on. He turned to face their destination to the northwest, and his concern about the weather only increased. The clouds seemed to have gotten darker and closer in the few minutes since he stopped. The rapidity with which the darkening clouds were covering the western horizon caused him to seriously question the predicted timing of the winter storm's arrival. He wished he had one of the newfangled mobile phones Martin Cooper had invented a few years before, but none of the telecommunication giants thought they would be profitable enough to begin setting up the expansive and expensive networks needed to make them more than a pipe dream. Tim disagreed and knew he would buy stock in the first company that took a chance, but so far no one was willing to venture beyond discussion. Maybe he should invite those executives to ride along with him on some of these trips so they could better understand the need, at least out here in the boonies. The players, trainers, and coaches were filtering back out of the store, so he hustled inside and used the restroom. On the way out, he stopped to tell the cashiers how much the team appreciated their hospitality and was ardently thanked for the impeccable conduct of their courteous kids. The store manager enthused. "It's always great when your buses stop here, Coach. You can tell the parents have raised these kids right, and you coaches make sure they represent your school properly." Tim assured them the team would be stopping there again on the way home after the games, and he would pass along the compliments to the kids and parents. Feeling buoyed, Coach Kelly walked jauntily out the doors, where he was confronted by a pair of uniformed sheriff's deputies. Feeling the eyes of the 39 youngsters and 2 coaches in the bus glued to him, he stopped and greeted the LEOs warmly. The larger one spoke up, "Coach, we just got a call from your transportation director. The cold front is moving faster and is stronger than expected, so the games have been postponed. You are to return immediately and make sure the kids all get with their parents safely. No one is saying it yet, but based on reports we are getting from law enforcement to the west, it will be bad storm, and it will get here around 10 to 11 p.m., not 3 or 4 a.m. Best get moving, Coach." Can we follow you back to the sheriff's office and use the phone to make a few calls so we won't be sitting there in the cold waiting for parents? He asked. We have a phone tree, so only one player from each team, freshman, JV, and varsity, will need to call. It would be a huge help to us. The deputies replied that would be fine. In fact, it didn't matter how many calls were made. Just get all the kids home before the high winds, freezing rain, sleet, and snow hits in a few hours. After the calls were made to parents to initiate the phone tree, Tim called the bus barn and told the transportation director they were headed back, and then thanked the deputies again. There was a lot of nervous, excited chatter on the way back as the teenagers overcame the disappointment of not playing, began considering the possibilities if it snowed, and planned their activities for the unexpected Friday night without obligations. Even though the phone tree worked, 2 girls and a boy needed rides to a new subdivision on Lake Travis because their parents were in Austin and would not be home until later. No one else was headed that way, so Tim loaded them in his double cab pickup and made the 40-mile round trip. While driving, he considered the effects the winter storm might have, including loss of electricity. There were no natural gas suppliers in his area of the county, so his home, like almost all homes in the school district, had electric heating. He needed to ensure he had plenty of firewood on the covered patio and stack some beside the fireplace, just in case. He reminded his passengers to do the same before he dropped them off and turned back to his home. It was nearly 8 p.m. when he pulled into the carport, and the only lights were in the living room. That meant his 2 young sons were already in bed, and he and his gorgeous wife, Karen, would have a much-deserved opportunity to lie on the carpet in front of the fireplace and explore the bounds of our passion, as she euphemistically described their sex fests. They usually started their explorations on Saturday, after they had recovered a bit from the exhausting workweek of professional educators. But this was an unexpected and welcome early start. After the grind of football for 3.5 months, and basketball games every Friday since football ended nearly 3 months ago, having a full weekend together sounded magnificent. Even if a blizzard howled around them, they deserved this. Karen was an award-winning kindergarten teacher who individualized instruction to meet the needs of her young charges. Tim was the best science teacher in the district, as well as an assistant varsity football coach and the head basketball coach. That they were dedicated to their students and their craft meant they were highly thought of by all the stakeholders and their peers, but that dedication came at the price of energy and time needed to keep their marriage strong during the work week. Saturday and Sunday were family time during the day, and the nights were US time. Sometimes us time included date night, but normally they enjoyed their family all day and each other's company and bodies all night, without leaving the home they loved. After arriving home, Tim filled the wheelbarrow at the woodpile out along the fence line, added the oak firewood to the neat stack along the wall under the covered patio, and kept adding until the pile was 6 feet high and 8 feet long. Just for good measure, he brought a final load and parked the wheelbarrow and wood under the covered patio near the sliding glass doors. Quietly entering the house through the laundry room, Tim hung his coat on the hook and crept stealthily through the kitchen toward the living room. He was hoping to surprise his darling wife, all 5 feet 3 inches and 120 well-distributed pounds of her, while she was watching TV in her favorite way. With her eyes closed, lightly snoring, he was hoping there would be a sexy satin negligee under the warm throw he knew she would be cuddled under, rather than her favorite flannel jammies. Silk meant, I'm horny, but flannel meant, I'm too tired. The blonde beauty sitting on the couch, however, was not his wife. It was their favorite babysitter, Sharon. She almost jumped out of her skin when he suddenly appeared in the living room. Coach, what are you doing here? Don't you have a game somewhere far away? Tim was surprised, because Sharon had graduated early to begin college, and he thought she was off in school somewhere. Hi, Sharon. The game was postponed due to the approaching winter storm. We'll play a makeup game Tuesday, if needed. If not, the season is over. Now, what are you doing here? Why aren't you at college, and where is Mrs. Kelly? Sharon looked dazed and confused. I'm living at home and going to community college this semester to get more credits before I start at UT. It costs a lot less to get the required general courses out of the way before I begin taking courses in my major and minor. Mrs. Kelly went to your game, like she always does. I guess you didn't see her on the road. I hope they are all right. I don't think they knew there was bad weather. Her voice trailed off as she read the consternation on Tim's face. Sharon, just to be clear, Karen and some others went to our game tonight. They have been going to all our out-of-town games, and you have been babysitting for her? And who is they? With sudden understanding in her eyes and horror marking her face, she clasped her mouth with her hand, and then answered, Oh my God, they haven't been going to your games? We've been. Oh my God, Coach. Oh my God. You have to believe me. It never crossed my mind. Oh my God. I'm so sorry. I should have known better. I'm so stupid. Sharon, you certainly aren't stupid, and let's not jump to conclusions. Who is the they that she's been going to the away games with? With eyes downcast, she mumbled, Coach Rogers is the one who has asked me to babysit. I don't know who asked the other girls. He told me it was easier for him to ask since your wife is on the elementary campus. The first time I babysat, it was just him and her going, and given his reputation, I should have been suspicious and told you. It's just that you two always seem so happy that I just didn't suspect a thing. I'm sorry. I should have said something. You said the first time, Sharon. Who else has been involved? I've only been the sitter 3 times. 2 days right after Christmas when your team was playing in the holiday tournament, and tonight. The first night she left with Coach Rogers. The next time they said they were going with Coach Slaughter and his wife. Tonight, I didn't see anyone but Coach Rogers, but Mrs. Kelly said they were picking up Coach Slaughter and his wife on the way. Coach Slaughter even talked to me at Dairy Queen today. He told me that, being the AD, he needed to be there, and his wife liked for Mrs. Kelly to ride along, so I thought nothing of it. She paused, looked thoughtful, and continued. There were other babysitters for other games, but Coach Rogers asked us not to talk about it among ourselves because your wife didn't want anyone's feeling to get hurt because they didn't get called. Looking back, we should have been suspicious about that, if nothing else. But you did talk among yourselves? Tim asked. Yes. Since I graduated in December, I don't see my friends and classmates as much, but we still meet up and talk every week or two. When we do, we can't help but talk about your little boys. They are so cute and sweet that we always tell stories about them to each other, Sharon responded. From those discussions, you learned that my wife was riding to all the out-of-town games with Rogers and the Slaughters? Tim clarified. Yes, Sharon answered. Tim looked closely at Sharon, who appeared more and more embarrassed by the conversation, and asked, when did he pick her up tonight? He dropped me off at 4 o'clock, and they left soon after, Sharon explained. Mrs. Kelly had a casserole ready to put in the oven and told me to feed the kids at 6. She said she wouldn't be back until around midnight, since the game is so far away. Tim sighed. Sharon, can you stay here until one of us returns? It may be that they didn't know it had been postponed and went on to the game. Or maybe they found out before they left and stopped at Coach Slaughter's house for a drink. Or maybe they stopped to eat somewhere. There are too many possibilities. I'm going to go look around for them before the bad weather hits. If she calls, please don't mention anything about the game being postponed or about seeing me, okay? Oh, and what was Coach Rogers driving? She responded that she was booked until midnight, so she was planning on staying, and told him they left in Coach Rogers' pickup. Where are you going to look? There are so many possibilities. I don't have any idea where they may be, so I'm going to drive back to the high school and see whether Coach Slaughter's car is there so I'll know which vehicle I'm looking for, and then ride around and see if I can spot that vehicle. I'll also try to find out from the transportation director if they got the message about the game being canceled. If they did, I won't worry about them being stranded on the road somewhere, so I'll check homes, bars, and restaurants. Whether or not I find them, Sharon, I promise I'll come back here and take care of you and the boys. I won't leave you to face the storm alone. She smiled at his promise, but then frowned. What are you going to do if you do find them, Coach? Please don't lose your temper and do something that will get you in trouble. You are my favorite person in the whole world, and I don't want you to get in trouble over something I helped cause. Tim assured her, Sharon, you didn't help cause this, and don't worry. I just want to make sure they are all right. There may be a perfectly logical reason for all this, and I'll certainly want to give her a chance to explain, but I don't intend to harm anyone. Just talk. She nodded. He asked her to go check on the boys, and to get the flashlights and lanterns out of the guest bedroom closet, so they would be prepared if the bad weather moving in from the west causes power outages. When she went down the hall and into a bedroom, he opened the coat closet by the door, opened the big gun safe, and took out a .44 special pistol, a 12-gauge pump shotgun, and an open-sight Model 94 Winchester 30-30. He took the guns to the truck, came back to grab his ammo bag, and donned a heavy parka he had bought for a hunting trip in the mountains of Colorado. He built a nice-sized fire in the fireplace, lit the wood, and closed the screen. Pulling a wool cap over his head, he turned back to find Sharon standing behind him with a flashlight. He told her, maybe you should get in our bed, cover up, and rest, just in case we are up late tonight. That way you will be next to the boys' room. Should they wake up and need something, keep the phone beside you, keep the fire going, and if anyone calls, act as if nothing unusual has happened. I'll be back soon. She put her hand on his arm, trained those big blue eyes on him, and told him again to be careful. She turned and went down the hall to the bedrooms. He picked up his 35mm camera and a couple of rolls of 800 speed film and hurried to the truck. Even with the carport shielding him from the biting wind, it was bitterly cold, and the main force of the front was still miles away. Using the dim light shining through the kitchen window, he belted the pistol on, pulled the plug out of the shotgun, and loaded it with 7 shells. After making sure the gun was fully loaded, he stepped up and into the 4x4 pickup. When he looked back at the house, Sharon was standing in the open door, the cold wind swirling around and tousling her natural light blonde hair. She looked worried, and neither the shorts nor the light hooded sweatshirt she was wearing were appropriate for the inclement weather approaching. He promised himself that he needed to get her home as soon as his business was done. The road to the lakeside ranch John William, J.W. Rogers inherited from his grandmother was unpaved, narrow, winding, and washboarded. So, in spite of his anger, anxiety, and impatience, Tim had to drive slowly. The Austin radio station was making a big deal about the arriving winter storm, which had already dropped record amounts of freezing rain, sleet, and snow in the Concho Valley, the Big Country, and the Western Hill Country. The announcer stridently warned that the storm was rapidly worsening, dumping heavier amounts of freezing precipitation as the Arctic air collided with the warm, moist air above the Balcones Escarpment. He repeated a warning from Austin Electric and PC that listeners should make preparations in the event they lose electrical power while the storm rages, but fully staffed crews would be working all night to restore power as soon as possible when an outage occurs. The warnings renewed Tim's vow to get back to Sharon and his sons quickly. He carefully reviewed and reconsidered his plan. He couldn't leave them alone all night without light or heat, so he had to get this right. He had 4 questions to answer. Who was she with? What were they doing? How long had this been going on, and why? Even if he had to use force or the threat of his guns, he would get his answers. The pickup was warm, but there was a ball of ice in his stomach. Before he approached the final house along the road before the Rogers Ranch, Tim slowed down and turned his headlights off. He didn't want anyone to see his truck or know another vehicle had gone to the Rogers Ranch house. The house was off the road a ways, but it was well lit. He could see the TV in the living room and the heads of the old couple on the couch facing away from him. A quarter-mile after he passed the house, he turned the headlamps back on and thanked Mother Nature for the natural light that remained before the storm hit that allowed him to stay on the narrow road without headlights. Turning his headlights off again before he crested the final hill of his journey, he drove to within a quarter-mile of the brightly lit house, and then backed in and parked on a pasture road surrounded by brush. The pasture road ran beside a small spring-fed stream that crossed the county road through a culvert. The house was over the crown of the hill, so he could not see it, and no one there could see him. The sky to the northwest was completely dark now, except for periodic lightning flashes, and it was apparent the clouds and storm were quickly moving closer. The sky above, however, was blemished only by light clouds being swept ahead by the winds high above the surface, and he had enough moonlight to see the road on which he would be walking. Best guess, he had 40 to 45 minutes, maybe less, before the winter storm hit and made his escape dangerous. Pulling the belt and scabbard out of the console, he secured the belt for his Bowie knife across his left shoulder and left it underarm, where it could be easily grasped. He slung the rifle over the other shoulder and hung the camera around his neck. He pulled the cassette recorder that he used to prepare lessons from his bag and put it in an inside pocket of his hunting jacket. With the flashlight secured in another inside pocket, he felt like a pack mule. That made him chuckle to himself, thinking about all the times he had worn this gear and still drug a deer out of the brush and to a road, in the dark, and chastised himself for being a slow. Holding his shotgun in his right hand, he jogged across the culvert and up the hill to the clearing where the ranch house was located. There was a single sentry light on the electric pole and back, where 3 pickups and a car were parked. Keeping to the darkness along the east front corner, Tim surveyed the house and, seeing no one, made his way through the dark to the lighted windows on the front of the house. Keeping out of the light shining through the windows, he surreptitiously peered into the living room. Coach Rogers, Coach Slaughter, and the most obnoxious school board member and lawyer in the district, Barry Benton, were standing in the middle of the room, drinking and chatting, but naked. Tim pulled out his recorder, found one of the windows in the old ranch house he knew was always open an inch or so at the bottom, and set the recorder on the ledge. The laughter subsided and Benton raved, "God, she is one fine piece of meat. JW, Steve, thanks for inviting me again." "She is, isn't she?" replied Slaughter. "A beautiful and insatiable woman, and, thanks to JW and I, the hostess of the best sex fest in the state." "Yeah, tell me about that," Benton asked. "How did you two get her hooked?" Slaughter answered, "It started at coaching school last summer in Dallas. She kept running around in these little dresses and jumpsuits, tempting and teasing, and then we saw her sunbathing in her bikini. I told him we had to get a piece of that. We cooked up a plan. I required her husband, Tim, and the new coaches to go to the All-Star game that evening, which screwed up their plans to go out partying with friends. Boy, was she pissed when he called to tell her. She was already all dressed up, sitting in the bar waiting for him. She was wearing a satin halter jumpsuit that left little to the imagination. It was cut low in front, even lowers in back, and you could see the outline of the thong she was wearing. She jumped me as soon as I approached her, but I apologized, sincerely explained that someone had to take the new coaches to the game, and warned that her husband needed to spend more time focused on football if he wanted to keep his job, so I picked him. I bought her 2 drinks, telling the bartender to make them doubles, and then convinced her to sit in a booth in the other room, where the jukebox was playing. Everyone else was in the bar where they had free appetizers, so we were alone. I persuaded her to dance with me a couple of times. I kept feeding her doubles, and I kept working my magic on her. The bartender took a 20 to close the room off, and I was able to start with her. But suddenly she pulled the top up, told me she was sorry but she couldn't do this, and ran back to her room. She avoided the hell out of me after that, but JW came up with a plan when basketball season began. JW, why don't you take over? JW began, most women will tell you I've got a gift of gab, right? Some, maybe. The rest think you're full of crap. Benton countered. Well, I started talking to her at the early season games, stopping by her room after school just to chat, and then calling her after she got home. It was all innocent enough in the beginning, but I was working hard on her. Compliments, little cuts at how her husband leaves her alone all the time and she has to take care of their boys, clean up the house, and still work full-time. You know, the usual seduction dance. I ramped up the flirtation, and by early December, we were having phone sex. It wasn't much at that point. You know, things like, tell me what you're wearing. I can still see you in that dress you had on at school today. You sure looked good, honey. Your voice is so sexy, and I just love those pretty legs. Stuff like that. The varsity boys had a basketball tournament in Taylor the 27th to 30th, so I ramped up the phone sex while hubby was at practice the 26th, and on the 27th, I showed up at her house with a babysitter after convincing her to go have a couple of drinks with me. I gave her a strong drink when she got in the pickup and took her straight out here. She protested, but I reminded her that whatever bar we went to there could be people there that know us, and asked if she wanted the rumors and speculation. As soon as we got inside, I made her another stiff drink, told her how good she looked in her little sweater dress and boots, and sat down on the couch beside her. When I brought her 3rd drink, I demanded a kiss. She didn't fight me when I kissed her the first time. The 2nd time she returned the kiss. Well, this time, I had my way with her. Once she was done, she got up, told me to take her home, and got dressed. I did, and she didn't answer my phone call the next day. I knew the team played in the last game that night, so I brought the babysitter over and told her to get dressed because I was taking her, Coach Slaughter and his wife, and some parents to the game in Taylor. She looked suspicious, but when I mentioned taking parents, she cheered up. When she came back 15 minutes later, she was wearing the blue dress and white boots she likes to wear to games. Of course, when I turned toward my house instead of Taylor, she threw a fit. I handed her a stiff drink in a 32-ounce cup, let her rant, and then told her I had filmed our encounter yesterday, and we were going to have fun again tonight or I'd send her darling hubby a copy. She cried. I told her she loved it yesterday and she would love it again tonight, and added that I had a late Christmas present waiting for her. She chugged the drink, stopped crying, and cussed me out for 10 minutes. Regardless of the cussing, she got out and walked into the house. I pulled her to me and gave her a long kiss. She responded, and I undressed her standing right here beside the couch. I think Coach will agree with me. She looked pretty damn good standing here in her white boots, white lace panties, and matching bra. She looked a lot better than pretty damn good, JW. Slaughter interjected. When I walked in from the kitchen, where I'd been hiding and watching, JW was already doing his business with her. Later I joined in, and we took turns doing her. Once she was done, she demanded we take her home. We promised her we'd do better next time. She said there wouldn't be a next time. And JW said we'd pick her up 30 minutes after the bus left for the tournament tomorrow, and to not wear underwear. She said no, but when we got there with a different babysitter at 3:30, she was dressed in that little blue and white striped mini dress, without panties or a bra. JW drove. I enjoyed her all the way to the ranch. JW corrected him. He forgot to add that she took her dress off before we had gotten 10 blocks from their house, and she rode naked through the outskirts of town and out the highway, screwing Steve the whole time. We had more than a few honks, but she didn't care. She just went apeshit crazy. Steve didn't last 5 minutes. That was the day we got Frank Hughes, her principal, involved. She walked from the truck into the living room totally naked. She not only took all three of us into the dirt, she later told us that she screwed her husband into a stupor when he came home. That woman is a total package, and thank God, she's our package. Frank had walked into the living room during the story and joined the conversation. I've got big plans for that pretty 304, boys. I've already told her I expect shorter dresses at work, and she will need to stay late at least 2 days a week for conferences with her principal and his friends. Tell me this, Kimo Sabe. What happens when her husband finds out? Benton asked. Hopefully, he'll throw her out. We can use a woman of her talents full time. Steve replied. Yeah, but we're trying hard to not let him find out, JW interjected. My brother coaches down close to his hometown, and the word down there is that he's as good a friend and as bad an enemy as you can have. Capable of murder, I'm told. And they say there are bodies hidden in the brush that could prove it, if anyone could find them. JW interjected. I'm not worried about that cuck, Benton bragged. If he bows up, I'll take him to the cleaners. Karen will get the boys, the house, his pitiful pittance of money, and he'll get a raw hole. If he fights back, I'll get some of my clients or business associates to drop him in the lake. Might send his precious sons to hell with him, if that's what it takes to acquire Karen's talents full time. Keep in mind, she ain't only doing poor boys like us. Think of the power that woman controls down on Congress Avenue in Austin. JW patted him on the arm and said, We're counting on you if he's stupid enough to start some shit, but if he never knows, it won't be problem. Sooner or later, we'll get her to leave him and set her up in an apartment. We can make spicy movies, and she can entertain us and our business associates, as you call them. They laughed, slapped each other on the shoulder, and went to get another drink in the kitchen. Tim fought his surging Irish and Viking blood as he leaned against the building, trying to let the rage calm enough to carry out the rest of his plan. He heard the wind pick up and a smattering of precipitation hit him as retrieved his recorder, and he snuck around the side of the house to the bedroom Frank had come from. The drapes were pulled back, the blinds pulled up, and neither window in the old house was fully closed. He could see and hear clearly, and easily take pictures through the open windows. Even though he knew what he would see when he got to the bedroom, seeing it was still life-altering. How in the world is this nasty woman who had been a loving wife and mother for 5 years? His stomach churning, he steeled himself, banked his anger to use it to accomplish that which needed to be done, and started taking pictures. The fat superintendent and the school board VP, John Allen, were standing beside the bed on which his wife was being screwed missionary by an unrecognized younger man. Allen had a video camera on his shoulder, and he was filming the youngster. When the young dude was done and climbed off, Tim recognized Larry Barnes, the a-hole husband of Sweet Jeannie, a fellow high school teacher and friend. Barnes slid backward off the bed and stood up. He turned to Joe Warden, who was next for Karen, and loudly announced, Isn't it just too damn wonderful that her husband can't satisfy his wife, so she turns to us for what she needs? I do enjoy cucking that man. My wife is always talking about what a great guy he is, and I know damn well she ran to him after I had to straighten her out last time. At one time, I thought they were having an affair, but I guess I can stop worrying about that. Hell, he can't even take care of his own wife. Karen put her foot on Warden's chest and stopped him from getting any closer, and then sweetly said, Come here, Larry, you big stud you. I want you again, right now? Larry turned toward her with a smirk, but stood there and laughed. You wore me out, woman. After you take care of these two, maybe by then I'll be ready to go again. With malice aforethought, Karen answered, So, you big stud. If we were married, you wouldn't be able to take care of my needs either, would you? Hell, you are my fifth of the night, and you didn't even come close to ringing my bell, much less satisfying me. I screwed you until you couldn't, just as I did the first 4, and just as I'll do the next 2, and then I'll start over again. If any of you are still able. So, Larry, you big stud in your own mind only. Let me give you some things to think about while you try to recover. You are barely half as big as Tim's. You lasted about 1/10 as long as he does, and if I offered Tim seconds, he'd be over here pushing all my buttons until he recovered. He would be doing me again, after 5 minutes or less. And remember this. If you ever demean Tim again, I'll yank your tiny balls completely off. With tears in her eyes, but steel in her voice, she stated with finality, It's not Tim's fault he married me, but believe me, he does a better job of satisfying me than the lot of you can do. Larry called her a 304, she replied, Exactly. And he slunk out of the room minus his characteristic arrogance. With the mood broken, Karen got off the bed, went into the restroom, and then into the living room. Tim moved back to that window in time to hear Karen state vehemently, "I'm done. You need to take me home now, JW." That announcement was met with dismay by her sex buddies, and Steve, JW, Frank, and Benton took turns trying to convince her to stay. They promised her they would banish Larry if that is what she wanted, and they would take good care of her for the rest of the night if she'd stay just a couple of more hours. JW put his arm around her. "Baby girl, we promised you we would send you home satisfied, not angry. Have a drink with us, relax for a few minutes, and then we can decide what to do. There is no rush. You know we all love you, and we'll take good care of you. Besides, if we get the 5-on-1 scene shot tonight, we can take a break for a few weeks before we finish up. Larry, you need to apologize to Karen for running your mouth, and then get your clothes and skedaddle on home. We wouldn't want your pretty wife to be worrying about where you are, now would we?" Tim was down to the last 10 shots on his second roll of film, but with everyone in the living room trying to convince Karen to stay and play, he made the impulsive decision to sneak into the bedroom and grab the videotapes out of the 2 cameras they used to film the festivities. When he got inside the bedroom, he took the tape out of the tripod at the left foot of the bed and inserted one of the blank tapes that were stacked on a chair. He repeated the process with the camera John Allen left lying on the bed. He was turning to leave when he spotted more labeled tapes on the bookshelf beside the door. Tim grabbed the stained pillow, took the pillowcase off, and stuffed the pillow under the bed. He quickly looked through the 20-plus tapes, gathered all those with KK on the label, added a tape entitled Sex Fest Highlights, and then indiscriminately grabbed videos and stuffed them inside his pillowcase sack until he had just enough and used cloth at the top to twist and tie it so he could carry the bulky sack. Slipping back out the door into the cold wind, which now included freezing rain and sleet pellets, forced Tim to the realization that he was running out of time. He began trotting back to his truck with shotgun in one hand, the 30-30 strapped over his shoulder, and the pillowcase in his other hand. When he came to Larry's BMW, he paused. The foreign vehicle belonging to that punk somehow released a spurt of the rage he had kept under control all night. White-hot fury rushed through his veins. He pulled out his Bowie knife, stabbed 2 tires through the sidewall, and muttered, "Take that, you arrogant, wife-beating a-hole. Try changing 2 tires in a snowstorm." Briefly mollified, Tim turned back toward the road to his truck, took 2 steps, and then paused again. Screw all of them, and the horses they rode in on. Let all those scum suckers walk back home in the snow, he yelled into the howling wind and freezing rain. With that proclamation, he went from truck to truck stabbing every tire on every vehicle, including the remaining 2 on Larry's Beamer. He used the tip to mark the paint job on both sides, the trunk and hood. His rage was channeled toward destruction now, and he was considering other ways to strike back without killing them all, although, he concluded, that option was actually sounding better and better. Hell, they did say they would kill him and his sons if he found out, and he found out, so now it was kill or be killed. The sentry light dimmed as the wind-borne frozen precipitation made it harder to see, and another idea popped into his mind. Blow up the transformer and leave them here in the storm without light or heat. He brought his shotgun up, and then remembered that JW had a backup generator in the pump house. Rushing inside the pump shed, he took up an axe lying against the wall and battered the generator beyond repair. Gasoline ran from the ruptured tank across the floor and against the wall south wall. Chuckling wildly in exhilaration, feeling the berserker blood of his warrior ancestors surging again after so many years of containment, he looked around for more targets. Seeing mostly junk, he used the axe to destroy the electric box for the pump. That served no real purpose, but gave him another outlet for his rage. Still carrying the axe, he went back outside, followed the telephone line back to the house, and destroyed the tether. Without a phone, they couldn't call for help when they discovered their vehicles had no tires, and, after he destroyed the transformer, they would be up shit creek without a paddle. He now had a plan for vengeance. The unanswered question was, could he carry it out, knowing the whole damn crew, including the mother of his children, could die? He stood in the blizzard, examining the scope of his betrayal as he stared at the brightly lit house, which contained the woman he had loved for 6 years and the 7 men there, ready to have sex with her, 6 of whom he worked with or for. Sadness washed over him, and then fell away as rage returned with a roar. Despite Larry's supposed banishment, no one had come outside, so Tim went back for a last look. He saw Karen lying across the bed with Joe Wardens. They were all there. Tim watched in anger and anguish as the wife he loved, so completely a few hours ago, serviced 5 men at once. His heart raced for a moment. He idly marveled at the fact that the guy she derided and threatened 10 minutes ago was now screwing her, and felt the last vestiges of his love for her drain away. His decision confirmed, Tim muttered. Screw them all. They've got it coming, every single one. My sons will be better off without the 304's influence anyway. He took pictures with the remaining film. He walked back to the light pole, leaning into the howling wind while lightning flashed and thunder roared. Tim backed off a few steps toward the road, aimed his full-choke 12-gauge shotgun loaded with number 1 shot at the junction of the transformer line and house, waited for a close lightning flash, and instantly pulled the trigger so the shotgun blast would blend with the thunder. All hell immediately broke loose. The line seemed to explode, and sparks flew from the wire, which was bouncing around, erratically hitting the ground, the trucks, and the pump house. He saw the lights in the house go out while he was backing quickly away from the terrifying acrobatics of the live wire. Satisfied with his work, he ran in the direction of his truck. When he made the brush line, Tim stopped and peered back through the driven snow toward the house. He saw a flashlight's beam, saw a man step out the back door, and scream to the others, "The damn blizzard is already here. Damn! The electric line has broken and is bouncing around shorting on our trucks. Get dressed. We've got to get out of here." The sound of his berserker laugh muted by the storm. He turned back toward his truck. The rain and sleet had turned into a blinding snowstorm, and it was hard to see. He had walked about 100 yards when he heard a loud whoosh and the sky lit up. He looked back. A fire was blazing somewhere behind the house, most likely in the pump house or one of their trucks. He chuckled again and proceeded onward. The brush on each side kept him on the road through the gully into the pasture road, where he spotted his truck through the snow. It was covered in ice, and even in the strong wind, the snow was sticking to the ice. Tim started the truck and turned the heater on the highest setting. He reached under his back seat, pulled out a can of de-icer and an ice blade, doused the windshield, windows, and mirrors, and bladed them off. He climbed back in, put it in four-wheel drive, and turned back toward town. He was secure in the knowledge that no one could see his lights in the blizzard that was obscuring vision beyond a few feet. So he turned his low beams and fog lamps on and headed for home. He couldn't see the ranch house, and hoped the old couple couldn't see his lights. Suddenly, the dark sky behind it lit up and then dimmed. There went one of their trucks. He laughed madly again and turned his attention back to the road. It was slow going, but he made it off the dirt road and onto the pavement leading to town. There was no traffic, but he had to drive slowly because he could barely see a few feet in front of the truck. The headlight beams just seemed to blaze and disappear into the curtain of snow. As he crept along, he thought about the motley crew that his beautiful, sexy wife was screwing. Had he found her with Burt Reynolds, or even someone good-looking, he might have understood. But this bunch of ugly, old, out of shape, and small-sized? What the hell? JW, the initial seducer, was an inch shorter and 40 pounds heavier than Tim, wore size 42 pants. He was probably nice-looking 40 pounds ago, but his jowls made him look older than his 33 years. Steve was about 5 feet 8 inches tall and looked 8 months pregnant. Frank was 6 feet 2 inches, but skinny as a rail, with a ruddy complexion, a big nose, and he wore a rug. Steve should have bought one. Instead, he went with that ridiculous comb-over. Frank was long and skinny, and he was also in his mid to late 50s. Benton was short, thick, and ugly. He was an attorney by trade, but most of his money was inherited. His current trophy wife was his third, and after the amount the first 2 wives had taken him for, if she got her share from a divorce, he wouldn't be able to afford a fourth. They had a prenup, but he set it up to be draconian if he caught her cheating. She agreed, but demanded reciprocity, and thinking the device would keep her in line while he still played, he agreed. However, if the pictures of this orgy got back to his wife, he would be screwed in the divorce. John Allen was your typical, mildly charming but smarmy insurance agent type. He looked good in a suit, but he had an unimpressive physique, pudgy around the middle, with stick arms and legs. The superintendent, Joe Ward, made Steve look svelte. He had a pear shape, had to wear suspenders to keep his pants up. He bragged that this was his last superintendent's job because he was retiring in 2 years, but he also bragged about his sexual prowess, so who knows if it was true. Larry was actually the best looking of the group. He was in the best shape. He was around Tim's age of 26. Steve was early 50s, Benton late 50s, Ward and Frank were early 60s, most likely, and JW was a road hard and put up wet 33 who looked 15 years older. So, he asked himself, why is my gorgeous wife, who could have her choice of anyone she wanted, doing this bunch of losers? Then it hit him. He had the answer to 3 of his questions. Who? At least the 7 losers. How long? Since coaching school, but the worst started 2 days after Christmas. And why? a combination of a sexually curious but inexperienced young woman with an out-of-control libido, unsavory men who took advantage of her, and blackmail. Tim was already adamant that there was no way back for her, even if she wanted to come back. Her ability to host sex parties and make movies for 2 months while keeping him completely in the dark proved she could never be trusted. To compound her felony, her actions tonight made him question whether she still loved him or had ever loved him. Of the men, 2 were fellow coaches, 2 were school administrators, 2 were school board members, and 1 was married to what had been his second favorite blonde beauty. After tonight, she was elevated to his favorite blonde beauty. Their combined betrayal, the disrespect they had shown for him and his family, and their willingness to seduce, film, and blackmail his wife meant the men had to pay, and pay dearly. Assuming they survived the night, the street lights were still on as he turned onto his street, but he was certain that wouldn't last. The electric lines were being whipped into nearby oak trees by the brutal winds and would soon begin shorting out. Tim hung his insulated pants and parka in the laundry room, and then used the access in the laundry room to hide the tape recorder, videos, used film, and camera in the attic behind a stash of empty moving boxes. It was close, but he had kept his promise to be back to take care of his sons and their babysitter by the time the storm got too bad. The storm had definitely arrived, but he could still wake the boys and they could ride with him to take their 18-year-old babysitter, Sharon, to her parents' home. Sharon heard him open the door from the laundry room and met him in the kitchen with a worried look on her pretty face. She hugged him tightly, asked if he was okay, and ordered him to take a hot bath and get dressed in warm clothes before he caught his death of cold. Tim wondered if all women were born with the capacity to think and speak that way, or if they learned it from others of their gender. "Sharon, it's bad out there. Won't your parents panic if you don't come home?" he asked. "No, Coach. I called them when the storm first hit and told them I was going to spend the night because it would be too dangerous to have you drive me home. They said that was fine. We should build a big fire and hunker down until the storm ends because the electricity was going to go out soon." Tim leaned back, raised her chin so she was looking at him, and praised her. "You are one smart young lady, Sharon, and I can't thank you enough for all you've done for me and the boys tonight. You go get out of those wet clothes and get things set up before the lights and heat go off. That will be thanks enough," she exclaimed. Tim discovered that Sharon already had a fire blazing. He could feel the heat from the middle of the room. She had also gathered his kerosene lanterns and flashlights and placed them on the nearby coffee table. He took a hot shower while he still could and got dressed in lined sweats. He pulled the mattress off the double bed in the guest room, dragged it into the living room near the fire, and then made a big pallet on the carpet beside the mattress for his sons, using sleeping bags, comforters, and blankets. If, or rather when, the electricity went off, the house would get too cold to stay in bed, so they would all have to huddle by the fire. "Sharon, come with me. We need to get you in some warmer clothes. Karen has some warm sweats in her closet. Take a hot shower and then put on a set of the fleece sweats and wool socks. You may want to layer up for warmth. I'm going to move the sleeping boys onto their pallet and get them covered with comforters and blankets. Bring those off the king bed in my room when you come so we will have plenty for the mattress too." Just as Sharon made it into the living room with the last of the blankets, the electricity failed. Tim added more logs, lit a lantern, and he and Sharon sat cross-legged on the mattress facing the fireplace, with the lantern flickering behind them. She promptly snuggled up to him, draped a blanket around them, and said, "I like this. The flickering lights are romantic, and being held by you it makes me feel warm inside." He knew he shouldn't be holding her this way, but he was angry, hurt, betrayed, and she needed reassurance. He handed her a big glass of water off the coffee table and told her to drink it all. "I filled all the pitchers in my 2 5-gallon water jugs, so we have enough to last us. The city gets water from the lake, and I suspect the water system will fail if the storm gets bad enough," Tim said. "We can't get dehydrated, which is easy to do in these conditions. We have plenty of water to drink, and even a sufficient amount that we can partially fill the tank to flush the commode, if we're judicious." Sharon drank from her glass but didn't speak. He felt her eyes on him and turned his head to look down at her. "Coach, did you find them?" He maintained their gaze, saying, "I looked everywhere reasonable. Even drove to the nightclub she likes. Nothing. I have no idea where they are, but I'm not an idiot, and neither are you. Karen has been running off somewhere with them for 2 months, lying the whole time about where she was. Therefore, there is only one conclusion I can draw. Let's leave it at that, okay?" What circled through his mind when she asked was quite different. "I saw my wife committing adultery with 7 men and took a bunch of pictures of them in action. What did I do about it? Something I may regret, but not what I wanted to do. which was kill all 8 of them on the spot. He sighed and changed the topic. We both need to get some sleep. If you wake up and the fire is getting low, wake me up and I'll get more logs. I don't want you to do it because the wind is so strong the door may get away from you and chill the house even worse. Sharon suddenly hopped up, grabbed a flashlight, ran into the bedrooms, and returned with pillows for each of them. They exchanged goodnight wishes, wormed under the covers, and tried to sleep. Tim knew he should but doubted he would. He was quite surprised when he woke up 3 hours later with Sharon sleeping snuggled against him and the fire burning low. He carefully extricated himself from her arms, put on a long overcoat and rain boots, and slipped outside to get wood. The storm seemed to have worsened. The lightning and thunder were gone, but the wind was howling, driving the snow sideways. The air was unbelievably frigid, and he had to close the sliding glass door to keep snow out of the house while he gathered the wagon full of wood he had prepared earlier. Tim managed to get the wagon inside without too much snow getting in. He parked it beside the fireplace and rebuilt the fire. When it was blazing, he checked his sons, found that they were warm and snug as bugs in a rug. Mark and Patrick were so excited they were almost incoherent. Tim explained the situation as something like going camping, but in our house. They clapped and laughed, until baby Mark looked around and asked, "Where is Mommy? She likes to camp with us, and I miss her." "Mark, honey, she stayed with friends last night because the storm got too bad and it was dangerous to drive. Maybe she can get home today, but I'm sure she will be here by tomorrow. Sharon is staying here, cause she can't go home either because of the snow, and you guys can bring all your toys in here where it's warm and play all day." Both boys loudly disagreed. It was their first snowfall at home, and they wanted to do all the fun things they had seen on TV. He put them off for an hour, but they were nothing if not persistent, so he bundled them up. Sharon put on one of Karen's ski bibs and boots, and Tim hurriedly pulled on a heavy jumpsuit he wore hunting. He grabbed the Polaroid camera and took everyone outside. The fun lasted only until the 25-degree weather overcame the joy of building a snowman and throwing snowballs, so they hustled back inside pretty quickly. The boys were shucked of their wet gloves and clothes, and warmed their little hands and bodies by the fire while Tim and Sharon changed. After that cold adventure, the boys were content to play with their toys on the carpet beside the fire. The gusting winds had died down by 10, and a hint of sunshine filtered through the clouds. Tim knew that the sun would begin melting the snow, and, assuming they were still alive and able, Karen's sex buddies would be bringing her home as soon as they could get rides or get their vehicles fixed. Turning the transistor radio on again, he listened to the myriad reports from points near and far, a couple of which caught his attention. The snowfall was much lighter south of Austin, but even worse to the north and west. San Marcos and towns to the south were business as usual, while Williamson, Bell, and Lampasas counties were still without power, and most roads were still closed. The hill country was harder hit still, with over 6 inches of snow above a slippery layer of ice resulting from the freezing rain. The high school where he worked had sustained roof damage, they reported, but the police had been unable to find the superintendent to get direction. They asked that anyone who knew his whereabouts contact the sheriff's office as soon as possible. Tim smiled and silently hoped that the roof over that fat blob had fallen in on him and his band of a-holes. He consciously excluded their 304 from that hope, but only because he knew it would make his sons sad. Her actions had turned his own heart to steel. Tim tried to prioritize his movements and decided the most critical next step was guidance from his attorney, who lived less than a half-mile away. His reason told him to stay right here, confront the 304 and whichever man brought her home, and get it all sorted out today. His sentient brain, however, insisted that he speak to his attorney to avoid bad mistakes. His brain won out by a whisker. "Sharon, fellas, I'm going to get dressed, get in the pickup, go see if the roads are open, and find out what the situation is with the electricity. If it is going to be off for several days, we may have to go somewhere that still has electricity and stay there until it is back on. I'm going by myself because I don't know how safe the roads are, but I'll be back in 2 hours, or before." Sharon looked troubled, but he smiled at her and said to keep the boys active so they will want a nap after he gets back. Tim started the truck and came back inside the laundry room. He collected his guns, tape recorder, the sack of videotapes, and his camera from the attic and put them in the truck. He went back inside to hug everyone goodbye, and then drove cautiously out of the cul-de-sac they lived on. The roads were better than he thought, and with the 4-wheel drive and all-weather tires, he made it quite easily to his attorney's house. Andy Robbins was only a few years older than Tim, and he had experienced the joys of divorce a year earlier, after he discovered that his wife's boss was also her lover. He made that discovery when he returned home to get some papers and walked in on them in his bedroom. screwing wildly and pledging eternal love to one another. While they were supposed to be at work, he went scorched earth, battering him and terrifying his wife. He was arrested for assault, and when he got out of jail, she had cleared their bank accounts and disappeared with their daughter. When all the facts came out in the divorce proceedings, he got primary custody of the kid and a judgment for return of his money. The problem was, his wife and child had disappeared and had yet to be found. He managed to get her boss fired from his job, but then he disappeared, and everyone suspected he and the cheating wife were together somewhere, living off Andy's money. As a result, Andy worked long hours and spent his time off fuming, sulking, and plotting the demise of the lovers. Andy was surprised to see Tim at his door on a Saturday, with snow and ice everywhere, and he was stunned when his friend and now client told his sad tale. Once Tim regained control of his emotions, they discussed his options. Andy consulted his law books for rulings in relevant cases, and they settled on a plan of action to achieve Tim's simple goals: get rid of his cheating wife, get primary custody of his sons, and not be bankrupted by the divorce. He had a separate goal for the two coaches in Benton, another for the principal, superintendent, and school board member, and yet another for Larry Barnes. Those were of secondary importance at this time, but their time would come soon enough, and it would involve pain. Lots and lots of pain. Andy promised he would have Tim's documents ready by Monday, if his laptop battery and backup held out. Because Tim had likely been seen driving his truck today, Alan advised him to go report his wife being missing to law enforcement. The local cops were all clustered at the station, and they were quite surprised by his entry. He knew most of them well, and they were quick to express their concern after he disclosed the reason for his visit. There were some curious faces, and more than one gave him a knowing look as they considered the possible reasons for his wife's unexplained absence from her family during a snowstorm. The chief told him they had scores of reports of missing persons, but that was likely because with phone service out, anyone not at home when the worst of the storm hit had been unable to call or get back home. They reported that the rescue teams had found a number of missing persons who had taken the first available shelter when the whiteout began. The sergeant reminded him that his wife was young, in good health, and smart, so he was confident she would be fine. They promised to add her to the list immediately, and law enforcement and emergency personnel would be on the lookout for her. The chief asked for a recent picture of Karen. Tim looked through his wallet, laughed, and said, "I hope this doesn't go out with the APB." He handed him the only photo he carried in his wallet. His wife standing on the sidewalk in front of Barton Springs Pool wearing a white bikini. They all passed it around and looked it over quite thoroughly. As he was returning it to his wallet, one young cop enviously muttered under this breath that he could see why he wanted her found ASAP. Tim and the others present chuckled, and the sergeant asked for any additional details that might help. Tim recollected that he came home early after the basketball games were canceled to find his young sons with the babysitter, who had no idea where his wife had gone. He told them that he rode around looking for her, but when the winter storm hit, he returned home to take care of his kids and the babysitter. He was going to take the babysitter home, but her parents insisted they not get out in the dangerous weather. Tim explained that he had built a roaring fire, made pallets, and they all spent the night in front of the fireplace. The babysitter was with his sons now, but he needed to get back so he could take her home since the roads were now drivable in his 4x4. The cops reassured him they would be on the lookout for Karen and wished him good luck in taking care of two active boys who were pinned up in a house. Before returning home, he rode out to the county lane that ran to JW's ranch and saw that the snow covering the road was unblemished. He smiled and headed home. Sharon greeted him with a smile and a reminder to be quiet, pointing at the sleeping boys. He explained to her that his attorney stated that he needed to take her home ASAP to avoid complications in his upcoming divorce. They discussed how to handle the situation if Karen showed up at her parents' house, with or without her lovers, and he gave her an outline of his plans for the weekend and Monday. She swore she would never disclose anything they had done, or his plans, even if she were tortured. When he came back into the warm living room, they were awake and finishing a snack with Sharon. They loaded the truck and started toward her house. The ride over snow-covered roads was uneventful, and her parents were overjoyed to see her. They assured Tim that they had a fireplace, plenty of wood, food, and water, so they would be fine. Her family started back to the house, hugging themselves in the cold wind. Sharon opened the back door, kissed the boys goodbye, and promised Tim, "I'd like to help you any way I can, Coach. Just let me know what I can do." Tim turned to her, said, "Well, as a matter of fact," and gave her an assignment. Sharon smiled, "Consider it done," and went into the house. Tim stopped by the police station to let them know he was taking his sons to stay with relatives down south until the power was restored. The officer on duty, Jimmy, was a former neighbor before moving to a larger subdivision closer to his wife's job. Jimmy asked how to contact him if his wife was found, and offered a questioning look when he gave him Andy's number. "Since there are no phones yet, I don't know where we will stay, but Andy will know where I am and how to contact me. He's a neighbor, Jimmy, and yes, he's also my attorney, but in this case he's my neighbor and friend. Let's leave it at that." Jimmy looked down at Tim's bare ring finger and held his own up. "I understand, brother, I understand. When I saw her name, I wondered why she wasn't with her family. Any idea where she is?" "Not really. I came home about 7 hours early because our basketball game was postponed. The babysitter was there, and she said Karen was picked up at 4:30 by a man driving a pickup, but she did not disclose where she was going or who she was with. Please let Andy know as soon as you find her, regardless. I just don't want the boys to be here if worst comes to worst, or if I find out she was somewhere doing something she shouldn't have been." Jimmy clasped him on the shoulder and wished him a safe trip, reminding him that there would likely be people on the road who didn't know how to drive in snow, so stay alert. The main highway to Austin was covered with barely disturbed snow. The traffic lights were out, and there were sundry vehicles stuck in the bar ditches and median, but his 4x4 with all-weather tires had no problems. He was low on fuel, so when her encountered an open station just south of Austin, he stopped to fill up. He bought an American Statesman newspaper and automatically flipped to the sports page. He immediately spotted the headline, "Mustangs win district title." The first and sixth place teams had played their game Friday afternoon in anticipation of the storm, and the first place team won. That meant they would not make up the postponed game because it no longer had any bearing on the playoffs. He was both disappointed and relieved. Disappointed that his team was eliminated, but relieved that his coaching duties for the year were complete. Now he could focus entirely on the unpleasant tasks ahead. As expected, by the time they got to San Marcos, there was only a sparse sprinkling of snow, and when they exited at New Braunfels, there was none. Tim drove directly to his friend's house, left the sleeping boys in the back seat, and knocked on the door. Will, aka Wild Willie or Wildman to his friends, grabbed him in a bear hug and tried to pull him inside. Tim explained that his sons were in the truck, so Will helped him carry the sleeping boys inside the house. His wife, Laura, told them to put the boys on one of the double beds in the guest bedroom, and then they adjourned to the kitchen table to talk. After they talked about the winter storm, Will asked why Karen wasn't along, and was incredulous when Tim told them he came home early because the basketball game was canceled and found their babysitter at his house. The babysitter told him that she was there so his wife could ride to the away game with his boss and another coach, as usual. The only problem, he disclosed, is that his wife and the coaches hadn't come to an out-of-town game all season, nor were they going to that one. Laura stared at him with a look of angst, and then came around the table to hug him. Tim explained that he was looking for a place to stay until tomorrow or Monday, and why. They told him he was staying with them, and Laura would help with the kids. It would be good practice for when their first was born in 7 months. Tim offered heartfelt congratulations and gave both bear hugs and kisses on the cheek. They discussed their impending parenthood for a few minutes, and then Tim went to check on his sons. Returning to the table, Tim asked, "Will, does you buddy still have the camera shop downtown? Is he open today? I need to print some images?" Tim asked. Will nodded, "Yes, he does, and he's open all day today. Do you want me to take you to his store?" Laura immediately volunteered to take care of his sons, and Tim drove Will downtown. Even if he wasn't open, he'd be there. He lives above his shop now, Will informed him as they drove. They got a divorce about 6 months ago, and, in spite of being the cheater, she got the kids in their house. He only sees them every other weekend, and for a month in the summer, his wife screwed around, and he got screwed over. Life's so weird, and Texas divorce laws suck. With a cautious tone, Tim said, "Will, there is more to the story than I told, but I need your word that you will never tell anyone, including a jury, that I told you any of this." Will took his right hand off the wheel, raised it, made the sign of the cross with his left, and swore he would never tell, before pulling away from the stop sign. "I found them," Will said in a monotone voice. "I took 2 hard drives of film, and I stole some videos. I think they are sex tapes starring Karen and probably some other women and girls, but I haven't watched any of them. I want to make some copies, hide copies in different places in case the cops make me give them back, and use them to get out of my so-called marriage with some of my money and custody of my sons. I hate to involve you and Carl, but I need your help. I am always with you," Wildman replied with a huge grin. "Brother Rat, you know we've got your back." Carl gave them a wave when they entered, finished ringing up a sale, and then came over to greet them. Tim told him what he needed to do ASAP, and Carl quickly agreed to do it while they waited. He told his helper to operate the front, took Tim and Will to the back, and prepared his computer. After he brought in the pillowcase full of hard drives, Tim asked how long it would take and how much it would cost to copy the lot. Carl counted, gave him a reasonable number for the cost, and said he had no plans, so he could do it this afternoon and tonight. As he was connecting the hard drives, he told them, "Let's get started. How many copies do you need?" Tim replied that he wanted 2 copies of each. Carl began the copying process. They were still sitting in Carl's office chatting when Laura called to remind they had promised to go out with 3 other couples tonight, and they wanted Tim and Carl to join them. The boys would be staying with 3 other youngsters and 2 babysitters at Harry's house, so no excuses would be accepted. The beer garden setting, with plenty of strong German beer and friendly folks, loosened everyone's tongues. They were the only ones outside on this cool night, and they had pulled enough tables together to accommodate everyone, though they were packed and side by side. There was a jukebox filled with cheating and hurting songs, mostly old country, but including a lot of Elvis, Ricky Nelson, Johnny Mathis, and some of the other crooners. When Betty, Harry's wife, asked where Karen was, Tim was on his 4th beer, and the beer told them about coming home early to find a babysitter instead of his wife not returning home that night nor sending word. He speculated that she was out having sex with other men, but claimed he didn't know because he took the boys and left before she returned. They knew the Austin area had lots of snow, but didn't know how bad it got. Tim certainly didn't elucidate them. Will already knew about Karen's exploits, but the other men were aghast. "I can't believe she would do that," exclaimed John, and Harry proclaimed, "I would never have believed Karen was capable of doing something like that. Are you sure?" Tim shrugged. "No, but there aren't a lot of other possibilities, are there?" Tim saw the 4 women exchange looks when Harry made his proclamation and called them out. "What? You ladies aren't surprised?" The women exchanged looks again, and Betty said, "No, I guess we aren't. Men are clueless to the wiles of women, but we read each other well enough. The last time we were all together she was constantly flirting and teasing when you weren't with her." "So what?" asked her husband. "You all flirt and tease too. Are you all having sex with other men?" "There are limits to my flirting, and part of my reason is to remind you how lucky you are to have such an attractive wife, Dumbo. But have you ever had to go look for me at a dance because I didn't come back to the table for 20 minutes after leaving to go to the powder room? Remember that? Remember how she said she got sick to her stomach and was hugging the commode, but then went right back to drinking? And what did Will's brother Louis and his friend Vic have to say afterward?" Betty's smirk and questions brought Harry up short, and he floundered. "Okay, but you know what liars those 2 are. We didn't believe a word because Will, John, and I were outside too, and nothing really happened while we were there." Laura interjected, staring at her husband. "Harry, John, Corky, Will, has Karen ever rubbed you on the dance floor or under the table? Has she ever rubbed her body on you and kissed you?" Will turned red and stammered, "She was drunk. It didn't mean anything." "Are you sure?" Laura asked. "And are Vic and Louis lying? Or are you 3 lying when you claim nothing really happened? You sound as evasive now as you did when I drugged the story out of you the first time." The women turned to Tim as one, and Laura said, "We're sorry, Tim. We would have told you if we had proof, but we did have our suspicions about her. We know she loves you a lot, but something has been off since after Mark was born. We all know she looks, dresses, and acts sexy, but she used to be all over you all the time, so we didn't worry. She would tell us girls how much she loved having sex with you, how you were a stallion in bed, and way too many details. But there was no question her life was all about you. Lately she looks like she's on the prowl after a couple of drinks. We noticed, even if you guys didn't. Maybe, given what you've learned, or think you've learned, she has come to love sex with other people too." Tim looked speculative, but then chuckled. "It's not that I don't think my wife is capable of taking on all 5 of these clowns, or that they wouldn't if she offered, but really, 5 men in 20 minutes? That gives new meaning to the Minuteman jokes we used to make about these 3. That part isn't true, is it, ladies?" Betty replied with a snide chuckle, "Well, it wouldn't be the first time," and the other wives laughingly agreed. Tim pointed at the 3 men and then let his finger go lax, mimicking a limp tool. Everyone laughed, but all 3 looked pained and guilty as sin. Tim was still digesting Will's shaky denial, the guilty looks, and everything the women said and implied when Carl walked up, greeted everyone, and introduced his cousin and her friend to the group. The mood quickly became upbeat as Carl's cousin from Tennessee and her friend from Georgia became the focus. The girls, who were junior roommates at Trinity University in San Antonio, had surprised Carl by walking in right at closing time. They informed him that he was taking them out on the town. He was leaving to join the group at the beer garden, so he brought them along. They drank too much, talked too loud, told embarrassing stories about each other, danced too closely with every partner, and, finally, exchanged goodbye kisses that were too long and too wet with people that weren't their spouses. Throughout the night, Tim randomly flipped from melancholy to happy to thoughtful and back to happy. Everyone tried to keep his spirits up, and he was the beneficiary of a good bit of the close dancing as each woman took her turn distracting his mind. At the end of the night, he received a bounty. Each woman tried to outdo the others in kissing him goodnight. Serena was last, and she practically assaulted him right in front of everyone. She slipped her number in his pocket and mouthed, "Call me," before stepping away. Tim awoke Sunday morning with a throbbing head and a queasy stomach, but a couple of aspirin chased with a big glass of water got him up and about. His sons were sitting quietly in the living room watching cartoons. "Did you sleep well?" she asked cattily, knowing the condition he was in when he went to bed. "Honey, you've got to quit flashing the guests. An a-hole like Tim might take you up on it, especially after the kiss you gave him last night at the beer garden." Will warned as he gingerly made his way to the coffee pot and poured a cup. Will grinned and asked, "So, what do you think of my wife? Nice body for a pregnant woman, right?" Tim laughed. Then they sat down to eat. Meanwhile, Karen was in her own thought. Karen found her mind drifting while Larry pounded into her without art or technique. She had flirted with him at the New Year's Eve party in spite, after deciding Tim was paying too much attention to Larry's wife, Jeannie. Jeannie was a member of the high school science department that Tim chaired, but there seemed to be a closeness that transcended work. With very little effort on her part, Larry was smitten. He rushed to get her drinks and danced every slow song he could with her. Jeannie was obviously jealous, and Tim looked pissed, but she thought his attention was cute and Larry was cute. When Tim complained, she accused him of doing the same with Jeannie, and that shut him up. She was right. There was something there. Larry began calling her after she got home from work, and just as with JW, the talk soon became phone sex and they talked dirty to each other. She was the instigator. She liked being able to manipulate him so easily, especially when he had an attractive wife that her husband had a crush on. She decided JW should invite Larry to the next party. Larry considered himself some kind of Lothario, but aside from his pretty boy looks, she soon learned that he did not bring much to the bedroom. He couldn't kiss, screwed like he was trying to meet a deadline, and showed little interest in pleasuring his partner. As ugly, misshapen, and ill-equipped as the others were, at least they treated her like someone special, appreciated her beauty and body, and tried to bring her pleasure. Larry was close to a complete zero. While he pounded into her, she idly wondered how he got a pretty little thing like Jeannie. He was only good for 7 or 8 minutes, thank goodness. Then all she had to do was pop another ex to keep herself interested, screw the other 2 losers, and get the big 5-on-1 scene filmed. She had been promised that her servitude would end when the film was completed and she could return to the less exciting but respectable and differently fulfilling life of wife, mom, and teacher. She knew, after all her experiences, she would probably be tempted to stray again. But right now, living the straight life had far greater appeal than it had in many months. There were 3 truths Karen had unearthed about herself: that she loved the thrill of seduction, that the first time was magical, and that she lost interest after that. She was bubbling with desire when she first screwed JW, and then again with Steve and JW, because being screwed by 2 men on the same bed was another first. That led her to believe the more the merrier. So when Frank appeared and demanded he get thirds or she would lose her job, she tested that theory. Screwing Frank was only mildly exciting, but having 3 men go twice made her excited. JW talked to her on the way home and promised she would enjoy another first when she came back out. The surprise was Barry Benton, Esquire, a rich lawyer, school board member, and well-known player in state politics. He was married to a beautiful woman, but said he needed variety in his bed. He wasn't much, although he was appreciative and tried to please her, but he introduced her to another aphrodisiac: power. Her first was a state senator who was chairman of a powerful committee. They got together in an Austin hotel in the middle of the day on a Wednesday, while she was supposed to be at an education conference Frank had conveniently sent her to. She was so excited to be doing such a powerful man she was practically climaxing when he started. In actuality, he wasn't much either, but the thrill made it special and she wanted more. She got her wish. 2 high-ranking elected officials came by the next day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. Neither was spectacular, but she made them believe they were. She couldn't get enough of the feeling of having a powerful man, and sometimes that was enough to make her climax even if the sex was mediocre to poor. On the last day of the conference, she gave a very important man a BJ and then screwed his biggest donor. When they left, she could say with a certain pride that she was screwing her way through the top elected officials in the state. The one that afternoon, though, was a freak, and she told Benton never again with him. Her next adventure was another party at JW's ranch. No elected officials, but they had added Benton and a sheriff. So the 3-train had led to 4, then 5, and finally, tonight, to 7 men. The hypothesis that more would be better was laid to final rest tonight. After all, she had screwed 5 without any pleasure, and she was certain the other 2 would do no better. Now she only felt bored and used, and she was just ready for this to end. Being a 304 and spicy star wasn't all it was cracked up to be. The only things keeping her here tonight were JW's threat to show Tim what she had been doing while he was working, the promise that she would be free after the movie was completed, and the offer of a $5,000 cut off the sale. If she got that, she would use it for a family vacation somewhere amazing. It would still be prostitution money, but that was the best she could come up with in recompense for her treatment of her husband and the neglect of her kids so she could go screw around. She had been assured that the audience for a niche movie like Beauty and the Beast was foreign and it would never be released in the USA. She kind of believed that. Still, that was a concern. She was insatiable. She knew it. She had come to accept it, and yet she knew sooner or later it would be her undoing. And then her reverie was burst with Larry's comments about Tim being their cuck who couldn't take care of his wife, and she retaliated with wrath. With her guilt already simmering and her newly reborn desire to return to her proper roles in her proper life, his words unleashed a torrent of anger, much of it at herself, but Larry bore the brunt of her ire. After she sent him scurrying for cover, she went into the living room to get her clothes and told JW to take her home. Tim would never have a clue that he was number 8 tonight. He never had known and he never would. She was too careful. They all tried to convince her to stay, using both persuasion and threats, but the argument she found persuasive was JW's promise that getting the 5-on-1 scene filmed tonight would mean there were only one additional short scene, fully clothed, before Beauty and the Beast was finished and she was free of her obligation. After another drink and time to calm down, she reluctantly agreed, deciding it was best to get this over with as soon as possible so she could return to her real life and the love of her husband and sons. The 5-on-1 scene was hard as hell to set up and film. They were in the midst of filming the scene when 2 explosions startled them and the lights went off. JW got a flashlight, opened the back door, and started screaming about a blizzard and live wires sparking on their trucks. He rushed back. They all hurried into the living room, and he put the flashlight on a table so they could see their clothes and get dressed. Karen had worn only a dress and high heels for the opening scene in which she innocently arrived to attend a party, only to be seduced in the living room by JW. She knew it would soon be frigid inside the house, so she wrapped herself in one of the quilts that were folded over the couch. They were trying to decide how they could get the electric wire under control when they heard a loud whoosh, and the shed and back erupted in flames. This caused general panic because their trucks were parked nearby, and the panic doubled when Benton's truck caught fire. It burned for a few minutes before exploding, which ignited Frank's truck. With 2 trucks ablaze, JW's truck right in front of Frank's, and Larry's car parked next to it, terror engulfed them like the fire engulfing the trucks. The last truck and the car began blazing in only moments, and the flames were lapping at the back of the house. Their shared terror spurred them into action. They scrambled around, grabbing everything they could use for cover and warmth, and JW started to the bedroom to grab the cameras and film. He changed his mind when he saw that part of the house was already on fire. He ran back to the living room in panic and hurriedly led them to the boathouse down by the lake. They were half running and half sliding down the embankment because the snowfall was so heavy and the path so steep. Reaching the boathouse, they quickly entered and surveyed the contents. Most of the things stored there were useless, like tubes, paddles, and boat equipment, but there was a propane heater. They piled boxes, rafts, and anything else they could find around the walls for insulation, and then JW lit the propane heater. The little heater wasn't much help in the terrible conditions, but by huddling together and sharing covers and jackets, they were able to ward off the worst of the cold. It was still miserable for Karen in her tiny dress, but she shivered, shook, clung to those beside her, and prayed she would live to see the daylight. After the adrenaline rush disappeared, they all began to consider their plight, and Karen realized she was not going to be home to relieve the babysitter or greet her husband. Oh my God, how am I going to explain not being at home to Tim, much less being gone all night? He's going to kill me and then divorce me. Everyone except JW and Steve assured her they faced the same fate, so they occupied their time trying to concoct an at least quasi-believable story. Most of their paltry efforts were ridiculously easy to disprove, but no one slept a wink, which allowed plenty of time for devising, considering, and revising story after story. Finally, just before dawn. They came up with one Benton was convinced would hold water in court, if not in an emotional confrontation with a mad spouse. Because he had already agreed to serve as the attorney for each of them, and because of his prenup, he was the one who had to be satisfied. They tested the story repeatedly by asking questions of one another, practiced, and rehearsed, until it was their story. Karen knew there were still so many holes it was more like a screen door than an airtight alibi, but it was the best they could do. Perhaps their spouses would be so glad to see them they wouldn't question the story. That was most unlikely when it came to Tim, Karen knew, but she was certain that the truth would be the end of everything she loved, so it was worth a try. She could always fall back on the truth and beg for a second chance. The long night also provided opportunities for JW to list and describe ad nauseum the things he lost in the fire. New things, valuable things, sentimental things, family heirlooms, and on and on. He was devastated by the loss of his things, making it seem they were more important than the marriages, reputations, and jobs the others were trying to save. Steve listened for a long time without comment, and then forcefully told him, JW, while you're wringing your hands and whining like a little a-hole, remember that you also lost all the videotapes and recordings you had made. What do you think Manny and the other investors are going to say when you tell them we have nada? Steve's blunt statement got everyone's attention. JW whimpered and rested his head in his hands in pain and sorrow. The other men began planning how to remake all the scenes and improve the movie. Karen sat silently and listened for a few minutes before confronting them with reality. The first thing you need is a new leading lady. I'm out. No videotapes and no audio recordings mean you don't have anything to hang over my head anymore. I was an idiot to let you seduce me, JW, but I've learned my lesson. When the good Lord himself smites you with a blizzard, fire, and brimstone in a single night, he's telling you that you need to re-examine your path. I have, and I'm not going back on a path that includes having sex with you clowns. No, sirree, it's the straight and narrow for me. Oh, you may threaten to tell my husband what I've done. Frank, you may go after my job, but, trust me, if you boys mess with me, the hell I'll rain down on you will make you think tonight was a picnic in the park. I don't know how I got myself caught up in this mess, but the lot of you can't hold a candle to my husband, so don't ever come near me again. Half-dressed, tired, and so cold they couldn't feel their feet. Not one male raised a voice in opposition. It had been fun, she was amazing, they had enjoyed her stunning body and sexual favors, but she had emphatically stated that she was done with it and with them. So be it. None of them could afford the problems she could bring if she brought her husband and the law into this. Besides, they had other prospects for her role, including a couple of sexy college girls, a few other women, and the deputy sheriff's beautiful wife. After the storm, they would still have to survive the killing frost they would encounter when they tried explaining being gone all night during a winter storm, leaving their wives and children alone and at the mercy of the blizzard. Not to mention the burned-up pickups and JW's house burning. The dawn brought another dose of misery to the outlaws hiding out in the boat shed at the Rogers Ranch. Daylight didn't mean they were found and safe, or that they would soon be going home to their families, but daylight did mean they were that much closer to safety, and that much closer to having to spin their barely believable yarn to their disbelieving loved ones. It was late Saturday afternoon when an Army helicopter from Fort Hood searching for people trapped in vehicles spotted the burned house and shed, and then the frantically waving people huddled down by the lake. A law enforcement rescue team and an ambulance with EMTs was sent to check on the well-being of the fire survivors. They found that all were suffering from hypothermia and dehydration, but the woman was in the worst condition due to the light dress she was wearing without undergarments. All were transported to the nearest hospital for treatment. The others were treated for frostbite and dehydration, but Karen was kept overnight for further observation and treatment. The doctor who examined her maid was suspicious at her condition, and he called the nurse outside, asked her to find out if the patient had been sexually assaulted, and told her to take samples, regardless of her reply, before she cleaned her up. Karen denied being assaulted, but acceded to being cleaned. The nurse surreptitiously took the samples and then thoroughly cleaned the woman, knowing full well that either she was assaulted, or she willingly had sex with more than one man. Phone service and electricity were still scarce resources, so all she could do was lie in the hospital bed, pray that her family was okay, that her marriage was okay, and cry. When Karen was released early Sunday morning, a member of the local police force was there to give her a courtesy ride home. She was wearing only borrowed scrubs and a light jacket from the hospital's lost and found in the windy 25-degree weather. So the police officer made sure the heater was on high all the way to her house. Even dressed as she was, and in a delicate medical condition, he was impressed with her beauty and the body that made even ill-fitting scrubs look sexy. Once there, The young cop helped her check the house. Finding no one there, and wanting to make sure this beautiful creature was safe, he built a big fire in the fireplace. His radio called him to another job, but before he left, he asked if she would be all right, and assured her again that he did not know where her husband was or how to get in touch with him. He was able to inform her that Southwestern Bell believed phone service would be restored in the area by tomorrow at the latest, and that Pedernales Electric claimed service in her area would be restored sometime today or tonight. After he left, she found a note on the kitchen table. She read it, and the tears came in a deluge. "Karen, if you're interested, the boys and I are fine. I've taken them to stay with relatives that have electricity. There are many questions I need you to answer, but let's start with these. Where were you? Who were you with? How long has this been going on? Why? If you're back, meet me at Andy Robbins' office when school lets out Monday. Be prepared to tell me the truth. You will only get one chance. Since I'll be with mine, you should bring your lawyer. Tim." The tone of the message shouted that he knew. Panic gripped Karen. How could he have found out? She knew that Sharon, who practically worshipped him, would have told him about Friday night and the other nights she babysat. And, being the smartest man she knew, he could have simply drawn the right conclusion. If that was the case, it was up to her to override his reasoning by using her feminine wiles, his love for her, and his love for the kids, to make him believe the pile of lies she and her sex buddies had concocted. She simply could not lose her man and her family because she just had to experience the thrill of new men. After all, she placated herself. From that error in judgment, she had learned that she really did love her husband, that he was the only man who could satisfy her in every way, including sexually. It may have been the wrong path. No, it was the wrong path to discovery, but now she knew. From this day forward, she would be the best wife and mother possible for the rest of her life. With that delusion keeping her emotions under control, she sat near the fire, covered herself in the quilt they liked to snuggle under while watching TV, and practiced the fairy tale she would weave that would mitigate his doubt and bring him, and their sons, home again. Jimmy read the report on the rescue of Karen and the 7 men when he reported to duty. He knew the story would verify rather than ally Tim's suspicions, but he had promised to let him know. Andy Robbins turned pale and shook his head in disappointment when he shared the details of the rescue, but asked no questions. Jimmy informed the attorney of the medical issues that caused Karen to stay overnight in the hospital and that she was now at home recovering. He advised Andy that emergency personnel were being told that electric and phone service would be restored soon. He asked whether someone would check on Karen, or if the police should place her on the list of people to check. Andy said it was only a few blocks, so he would check in with her periodically until power was restored. As soon as Jimmy left, Andy dressed in snow gear and cautiously made his way to the Kelly home. The look of joy on Karen's face when she threw the door open was replaced with trepidation when she recognized Andy. She invited him inside, moved 2 chairs near the fireplace, and asked him to sit and talk to her. Karen was glad she had changed into flattering but modest jeans and a sweater on the slim hope that Tim would return home when he found out she was there. Andy was Tim's good friend, but she had seen the wanting looks he gave her when he thought no one was looking and intended to use his feelings for her to ply him for information. Sitting primly, but angled so he could see her charms well, she moved her chair slightly nearer the fire and Andy. She was near enough he could smell her perfume. With a concerned and innocent look, she asked Andy where Tim and the boys were and how she could talk to him. He answered honestly that he didn't know, but Tim had promised to call when phone service was restored. Karen's disappointment showed, but she replaced it with a gentle smile and told him how happy she would be when she was reunited with her sons and husband. The searching look Andy gave her caused her to wrinkle her lovely face and tell him, "Andy, I know you have questions, just as Tim does. I'm not going to tell the whole story until I'm with my husband, but let me assure you it is not as it may seem." "Karen," Andy demanded gently, "the police officer told me about you being trapped overnight, the house and cars burning. That explains why you didn't come home, but how do you explain leaving your children with a babysitter and going off with 2 coaches Tim dislikes and doesn't trust, on the pretense of a trip that never happened?" Karen's heart was racing, but her exterior composed. She answered sincerely, "Andy, we really were going to watch the game because it might determine whether the team made the playoffs. When we stopped at a convenience store about halfway there, everyone was talking about the weather report and that all the games that had been canceled, so we turned around and came back. JW's ranch was kind of on the way home. We stopped by there so he could see if he needed to pick up more wrap for his exposed pipes while he was in town. Some of his friends were there playing poker and drinking. We talked with them and had a couple of drinks. We were about to leave when the storm hit. You know the rest, but you don't know that I thought I might die. and I prayed repeatedly that I would survive so I could hold my husband and sons again and tell them how much I love them. Yes, there is more to the story, but I'd rather save it for Tim. Are you sure you don't know how I can reach him? I need my guys." He felt sorry for this lovely creature, but two things prevented him from falling under her spell and spilling the beans. Tim was legally his client as well as a close friend, and he knew she was lying through her teeth, yet looking so sweet sugar wouldn't melt in her mouth. She was an accomplished actress and liar, and she sold the story well. It was clear she was going to lie rather than tell the truth and beg forgiveness. The fact that Tim had witnessed the events and would not accept any more lies would be her undoing if she persevered. He cautioned her, "Karen, that is certainly a plausible story, but I need to remind you that any chance of reconciliation with Tim will depend on you telling him the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I don't know how much he knows and how much he is assuming, but I can tell you that your story is not aligned with what he believes happened, and your husband is not a dumb man." Karen's concern grew with Andy's warning, but her demeanor continued to display calm certainty that everyone would understand and forgive once they knew the truth, or at least the truth she wanted them to know. "Andy, I don't know what Tim thinks happened, but you and I both know he has a quick temper and can jump to conclusions when angry. I'm sure when he knows the truth, everything will be fine." Andy gave her a pitying look. He got up, told her he would check back in a few hours to make sure she was doing okay, and left after receiving a kiss on his cheek and a whispered, "Thank you for being our friend." He drove home with her smell and the touch of her lips on his cheek, keeping him warm. After Andy left, Karen changed clothes and wandered about the cold house with a heavy coat over her fleece sweatsuit. Some of the boys' toys were missing, as were several sets of their winter clothes. Tim had taken all his toiletries and some of his school clothes, but he planned on coming back because nothing else was missing. She went back to the warm living room, added 2 more logs to the fire, and lay down on the couch. She was completely exhausted from the events of Friday night, not sleeping more than a few minutes all night, worrying all day, the excitement of finally being rescued Saturday, and being returned home today. She piled quilts on top of herself and luxuriated in the relative comfort of her home, which, even without electricity, was wonderful. She relaxed and drifted off to sleep. Her first dream turned into a nightmare, waking her in a state of torment. It started beautifully. She was sitting at a table with her husband and 5 other men. The men took turns buying her drinks, flirting, and dancing with her. When they danced, they would all find reasons to put their hands on her intimate spots. It felt good, but she was worried about how Tim felt about their actions. She asked him why he was letting them touch her that way, and he replied it was her body and her life. She could do with it as she wanted. It made her mad that he wouldn't tell her to stop and make the others leave her alone. So she started getting raunchier and raunchier with the other men, all but dry humping them on the dance floor. Finally, one of them brought her back to the table, but instead of seating her in her chair, he set her on the table. He put his arms around her, pulled her up against him, and they kissed. Her husband was staring at his wife and her assailant, but seeing no resistance on her part, he didn't react. Everyone watched as they started to have sex. The crowd began to cheer. Soon, a giant of a man took his place. She cried and fought him, afraid he would split her in two, while the crowd chanted, "Go, go, go." She was screaming no, but the crowd was chanting louder and louder. The giant leaned down and told her in a gruff voice, "When I finish with you, you won't even feel your husband making love to you." And he roared with laughter. She awoke screaming, sweaty, terrified, and alone, and cried until the garbled images stopped flashing through her head. She knew it was only a bad dream, but she also knew Tim would look at her with the same disgust she saw in her dream if he ever found out what she had been doing, and he would walk away and leave her, just as he did in her dream. When she finally cried herself out, she drifted back to sleep, and this time she avoided a nightmare. Afternoon light was streaming in through the west windows, and someone was knocking on the door when she awoke an hour later. Still sleepy, dazed, and confused, she rushed to the door, pulled it open, and found Andy standing there with a large thermos and a sandwich wrapped in aluminum foil. "I have a propane stove, so I brought you a ham, egg, and cheese sandwich and lots of coffee. How was your nap?" Karen knew she must look a fright. She hadn't even run her hand through her hair before she opened the door, and she had napped in the clothes she had on. "Thank you, Andy. Can I freshen up and then drink some coffee and eat with you?" He looked at her with a crooked grin, cocked his head, and asked, "Why? You look perfectly groomed to me." She laughed at his words and fled to the nearby bathroom. The mirror proved she was anything but perfectly groomed, and she set about making herself presentable. Hair in place, light makeup applied expertly, and a very flattering sweatsuit on, she returned to the living room. Andy was adding logs to the fire in the fireplace, and when he turned, his face said he approved of her new look. He returned to the coffee table and offered her a cup of coffee with cream and sweetener, just like she liked it. She thanked him, and then ravenously ate the sandwich. I'm embarrassed that I scarfed the sandwich like that, but I was so hungry. I don't know when I last ate. Thank you again for taking care of me. Andy was trying not to stare at the beautiful creature in front of him, and was diligently trying to resist falling under her charms. He looked away, poured them some more coffee, and reminded her that he had promised the police he would look in on her from time to time, given all she had gone through and the lack of electricity. She was watching him earnestly and spoke softly to him, saying, "Regardless of your motivation, I thank you. You've been a good friend ever since we moved here, and I don't understand why we don't get together more often. Being a divorced man without children, I don't fit into the group like I did when Dina and the kids were with me. You guys didn't neglect me. I withdrew from you. I've spent my time away from work looking for my wife and kids, and asking myself what I did wrong to make her do what she did. I'm not very good company anymore, and I haven't wanted to subject the rest of y'all to my condition. So, don't feel bad about my not joining in more. It was my choice that led to my exclusion, not anyone else's." Karen was struck by the fact that her choices were very likely to result in her banishment, unless she could convince Tim and Andy that her absence Friday night was no more than a confluence of dire circumstances, and that nothing untoward happened. She was fearful, however, that their combined intellect would destroy the story she had helped concoct, under duress, with the not-so-bright a-holes in the boathouse. She could use an ally when the confrontation came, and Andy had always had a thing for her. Maybe, just maybe, she could lure him to her side. "Andy," she said softly, "it's really warming up in here with the big fire and the sun shining in, and this fleece is hot. Do you mind if I change into something more comfortable?" He replied not at all, so she hurried down the hall to her closet. Andy was standing by the sliding glass doors looking at the melting snow when she returned. The look on his face said he agreed. She pulled the old love seat away from the wall and placed it nearer the fireplace, sat down, and invited Andy to sit with her. He did. She angled her lovely legs toward her prey, her knee barely touching his leg. She began talking animatedly about the winter storm being so much stronger than forecast, and about how it caught so many people unprepared. Andy appeared leery about her proximity in the course of the conversation, so she took a different tack, asking when the basketball team would be playing the postponed game. Andy explained that they wouldn't, because the first-place team played their game and won. So there were no playoff implications, and it would be too much trouble to find refs for an unscheduled game. Oh, goodness. I so wanted to watch them play again. His little team improved so much this year. They try so hard and he coaches them so well. They all love him, you know? So do his students. That's why he is teacher of the 6 weeks again. He gets it several times each year, and was teacher of the year our first year here, she bragged. In her excitement, Karen innocently pressed her knee more tightly against Andy's leg, and put her hand on his arm while she went on about what a great coach and teacher her husband is. Andy looked uncomfortable, but didn't move his leg or her hand. "Now, Andy, let's talk about you. Tell me how you are doing. I mean really doing. I know what you say. You are over the divorce, and now you just want your kids back. But I sense a deep sadness in you, Andy. Are you really all right?" As she asked the last question, Karen rubbed his thigh and left her hand resting there. He made no effort to move it. Looking at her with a deep sadness in his eyes, Andy answered, "I'm doing as well as can be expected, Karen. Catching them was devastating. Our divorce was just nasty, and losing my kids nearly killed me. If I could do it over again, there is a lot I would change. Perhaps I could have prevented it. Perhaps we could have worked it out. Perhaps not, but I didn't give us a chance because I didn't give her a chance to explain. I wish I had. So, here I am, lonely and alone, driven to find my ex-wife and kids to the exclusion of having a life outside my work and my quest." Karen raised her right hand from his leg to grasp his arm above his elbow. She laid her head on his shoulder and let the smell of her freshly washed hair and her perfume waft up to his face. "Oh, Andy, I'm so sorry," she whispered with great compassion, while taking his hand with her left hand and squeezing it. Karen knew the effect she has on men when she's this close. She smiled at her power and then looked up at him compassionately with her big eyes, inviting him to kiss her so she could make it all better. Andy's head tilted down. He lowered his lips to hers, and they kissed softly. She could feel his passion grow as her lips pressed against his. Andy was completely under her spell, intent on taking and sexually possessing this incredible creature. He didn't care that she had been used by 7 men 36 hours ago, that she was the wife of his client, or that he was consorting with the enemy by his actions. All he wanted was to see her incredible body. They undressed and started making out. He was nearing a much-needed early conclusion when a bunch of frozen snow fell off the roof and hit the patio slab with a thud. Both of them were startled. They scrambled to identify the intruder, saw what happened, and settled back into position. That brief interruption, however, was enough for Andy's brain and conscience to kick in. He pushed Karen away, stood up, and urgently told her he had to leave. Karen made puppy dog eyes at him. Her lips pouted, and she conjured up her sweetest, sexy voice. "Andy, I can tell how much you need this. Let me give it to you, as a friend, and no one will ever know. Come on, you know it's been too long. You need it." Andy paused, but the panic from his loss of control drove him to rush to the door, tell her goodbye, and disappear. As she lay on the couch, she wished him hadn't become such a prude. "We could have so much fun," she thought. "It's almost as if we changed roles. In the beginning, he was the adventurous one and I was the shy one. He had more than 24 women before we met, but I had not had a single man. He was my first. Now I want to explore my sexuality, see what all I missed by my silly, misguided resistance to sex before marriage, but I want him too." She reminisced about their early sex life. The guilt from her failure to remain a virgin until marriage, the product of her cultural and religious upbringing, quickly faded as each experience was better than the last. Occasional bout of Catholic guilt could not keep her from wanting to have sex with him as soon as she saw him. She began to look at the other hunks that buzzed all around her and wonder if she could reach the same levels of ecstasy with them. But she knew she and Tim were soulmates, so they got engaged and married, and immediately had 2 kids. While she was pregnant, her hormones were so out of control she tried to kill her husband with sex until she got so huge she couldn't. Her trim body returned to perfection within days of giving birth. Now, with nearly 4 years of marriage behind her, she craved sex so much she could think of little else when she wasn't working or caring for her sons. She initiated sex 3 or 4 times as often as her husband, but truth be told, it didn't keep her satisfied. She wanted more and more and more. Unfortunately for her marriage, she couldn't help thinking about new experiences with new men. Big, little, short, or tall. She wanted to try them all. More specifically, she admitted to herself, she wanted to lure them, tease them, seduce them, and make them lust for her until they were defenseless, and then have them. Her first time to stray was simply thrilling. She easily seduced the brother of Tim's best friend and another married man at a dance. They danced with her, told her how beautiful and desirable she was. He rubbed her bare legs under the table with her husband, all the other spouses, and several other couples chatting merrily nearby, and convinced her to sneak outside with them to smoke a joint. She excused herself to go to the restroom, but slipped out the side door. They took a couple of hits off the joint. She was flying high, and quickly joined them in the custom van one of them owned. It was her first time cheating, and with 2 men at the same time. She was grilled when she returned to the table, but she claimed that she felt nauseous from the drinks and snacks, so she took some medications and stayed in the restroom just in case. Her 2 lovers looked amused, but Tim and the other men bought it and offered sympathy. All she got from the women, however, was cold, questioning looks. Regardless, she got away with it. The sex wasn't good, but the thrill of cheating was addicting, and she loved that she did something so nasty and got away with it. Having successfully cheated once, she had to try it again. She could tell the women were suspicious, but they were also drunk and getting drunker. Karen controlled her drinking, played around with her hubby, and let the others have fun while she waited her time. They were all dancing with each other, and there was more than a little hanky-panky going on in the dark corners of the dance floor. Tim's best friend, Will, and 2 brothers seemed her most likely dupes, based on the way they got hard, steered her across the room, and tried to screw her in the dark section of the dance floor. She whispered seductively in their ears and then licked them, making her desires clear and spurring them on. She was dancing with Will when his wife and 3 of the other women went to the restroom. He quickly escorted her out the side door. The 2 brothers quickly joined them. No telling what would have happened should a couple of smokers not come out the door and busted up their little party. She was ready. She certainly wouldn't have stopped them, but fate did. She next used her wiles to seduce and have one of the young married coaches in their first school district and lured her old boyfriend, now married, into an affair that nearly cost both of them their marriages when his brother drove into the pasture where they were screwing in his pickup. She hid on the floorboard. He gave a lame reason for sitting in his truck, something about watching the sunset and thinking. His brother didn't buy it. But he also didn't come search the truck. Nearly getting caught added even more excitement to their affair from her perspective, but he was terrified and refused to have anything to do with her after that. JW was proud of his seduction of her, and Steve was proud of how they forced her into screwing him and the others, but, in fact, she would have probably seduced them just to try them. Yet, in spite of her constant craving for new meat, and in spite of having screwed over a dozen men since getting married, her husband was far and away the best she'd had. Tim rang her bell over and over with his powerful, cut body, but even his mind-blowing efforts could only temporarily satisfy her. She bought batteries for her battery-operated boyfriends at Sam's Club each month. Hell, she had worn out 2 of her BOBs since Christmas, and that was while she was getting screwed by her husband almost daily and 3 to 7 other guys weekly. "You're right, Tim. I am insatiable," she cried out. Dear listeners, the next part will be out in a few hours. Meanwhile, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.